Hey all, here are OS Reviews. In this video, we're taking a closer look at the Bigme B7. This is a 7-inch color, Android-based eNote/eReader, really a tablet, and comes with a wireless charging magnetic stylus pen, which allows you to annotate, take notes, doodle over some memos, as well as books that you're currently reading. And this is technically an upgrade compared to last year's Bigme B751C that we also reviewed, having a similar design and concept, also with physical page turn controls on the side, reminiscent of the Kindle Oasis. So you can use this to turn left and right through your books instead of having to rely on the touchscreen, compared to e-readers that don't have any physical keys, for example, like the Bigme B7 that we also recently checked out, which was a 6-inch device versus the 7-inch panel over here. Now, compared to the B6 as well as last year's model, both of these devices come with 4 GB of RAM and 64 gigs of storage, which has been further expanded to 8 GB of RAM and 128 GB of storage on the B7, allowing you to hold a little more content and slightly better for multitasking. Furthermore, only the B7 here supports a data SIM card slot on the side. It's an unlocked device that you can technically use as a phone, although I find that to be a little bit ridiculous. So the form factor might be a little too large to hold next to your head when making calls, so you can use a Bluetooth headset, but it does mean you're able to rely on data connectivity instead of having to use Wi-Fi only, maybe if you're traveling and again Wi-Fi isn't available. So it supports T-Mobile, for example, here in the US, kind of similar to their Highbreak, which was their phone-sized e-reader that we also saw a couple of months back. However, the Highbreak does have a more conventional smartphone-like form factor with a more stretched 2:1 aspect ratio screen, compared to this one having a larger surface area, again at the 16:9 aspect ratio instead, but both have again data connectivity. However, the Highbreak did not come with any Stylus Pen input support, so again this is perhaps the most well-rounded in terms of feature set out of all of their offerings that we've seen yet for these compact e-readers. Now, it's still relatively slim and lightweight at only 5.8 millimeters, only a little bit over 250 grams in weight, so it's not bad. And again, the build quality is a slight refinement over the previous B751C. For example, the physical page turn controls this time are crafted out of machined aluminum and metal compared to plastic on the previous, and also the design of the included case, which is bundled inside of the box, also is a little bit different. This time it's magnetic and just snaps on a little bit more easily. You can pop it off if you want to remove it for even lighter reading, and also has a kickstand mode that you can use to pop it up, for example, giving it a little bit more versatility compared to the previous case did not have any folding elements to it. And also the stylus on the last generation model snapped in using this physical slot instead of being magnetic like we have on the newer model. Again, this one here is wireless charging, so it just needs to top up when you are connected to the tablet itself, compared to the previous model stylus actually used a quad A battery that you had to replace after around 6 months of use, as you can see over here. That being said, in terms of the fit and finish of the two stylus pens, the previous model here was crafted out of a metal material compared to a polycarbonate slightly lighter plastic build on the B7 stylus, but both feel comfortable enough, kind of like a pencil with a slight tapered edge when you're holding onto it. There is no eraser tip on both models, although the newer B7 stylus has a button on the top that you can tap on as a kind of action key if you're holding down to circle to erase, compared to the previous one had a button here on the front instead. And then last but not least, in terms of hardware at least, the B7 also comes with a 5-megapixel autofocus camera with an LED flash on the rear, which is missing on the B751C, as you can see. And instead of being used to take photos like you would on a normal phone, this is primarily designed for scanning in documents and books, since it is more of a productivity-centric device. So yeah, overall, the fit and finish just seems a little bit more tight and precise on the B7. And we can also see this when we snap it out of the case as well. The back plating looks something like this, completely flush. There is no camera hump, for example. And on the very bottom here, we just have that aforementioned micro SD card slot / SIM card slot tray. You'll find microphones scattered around the chassis, which are used for taking voice notes in the memo mode, so it gives you some transcription capabilities. The side here features USB Type-C for charging and a status LED light. And by the way, the case also allows you to charge it at the same time using this pass-through slot, as you can see. The battery capacity here is 3,000 milliamp hours, And battery life is going to vary based on the type of applications you're using this with. For example, if you're simply reading back some books and comics that you have stored on the device and you have Wi-Fi turned off, using it like a basic Kindle, it can actually last you for around a week to 2 weeks in my testing. A little bit shorter if you have the backlight turned on, slightly longer, almost 2 weeks if you have the backlight off. Because it is an e-ink screen, it remains actually more visible the more light there is around you, behaving very similar to a printed piece of paper. That is going to be one advantage versus conventional LCD or OLED screens where you have to crank up the backlight to a higher amount in order for it to remain visible if you're reading in direct sunlight at the beach, for example, and it might draw more power as a result, compared to e-ink only takes a little bit of juice when you are refreshing the entire page. So we get those same attributes here, pretty decent battery life there. However, if you're using it more like a normal Android phone or tablet with Wi-Fi, cellular 4G turned on, and you're using a faster refresh rate mode, for example, streaming back videos for some reason, that's not really the main forte here, it's going to last shorter, closer to about a day or so, similar to a regular phone or tablet. So again, just depends on the type of things that you're using it with. Compared to just reading comics and books offline, it will last significantly longer there. Still, these Android-based e-readers will be a little bit shorter compared to a true Kindle, which uses a more locked-down proprietary OS that has even better energy efficiency, sometimes lasting upwards of a month, but the functionality there is also much more limited. You're not able to download any third-party apps like you can on here. This one does support the full Google Play Store as well, so you can actually download any apps that you would find on a normal, again, Android phone or tablet, and that includes additional reading tools. Otherwise, we do have a simple loudspeaker on the side as well, so you can also listen back to audiobooks directly on the device, though it can also connect to Bluetooth headphones and speakers instead if you prefer. The top here just houses a power on and off key, rounding out the design. So overall, pretty decent fit and finish. Maybe only one hardware feature that I would like to see added, perhaps in the next gen revision, would be a integrated fingerprint scanner with the power key for added biometrics. Yes, you can set a password or PIN, but having a fingerprint reader can be even more convenient. Now, compared to the B751C, the price this time around with all of these upgrades in terms of, again, 2 times more RAM, storage space, a more convenient magnetic wireless charging stylus pen, as well as cellular connectivity, means that this time around, the B7 is around $50 more expensive. And for context, the previous model sold for around $250. I thought that was a decent price. So you are paying a little bit more for these added features and enhancements, but currently it looks like there is a 10% off coupon that you can clip on their site, which brings the cost a little bit closer to around $270, which I think is fair considering all of the enhancements that you're getting here. It feels more like a premium compact e-note compared to being more budget conscious on the original B751C, which continues to be available for sale as well. But at the same time, if you don't need that stylus input, you don't really care about the extra RAM as well as the data connectivity, then the more budget device as well would be the B6 that we also reviewed, and I did really like this device as well. The screen quality itself actually remains pretty much the same, I would say, across all of these devices, which is not too surprising because they're all based on the same, again, Kaleido 3 technology. So we have 300 ppi for the sharpness when looking at black and white text, and that means that for the most part, even looking at the smaller text details are quite legible as you are reading, with decent enough contrast as well. However, when you're looking at color images, this color layer is slightly lower res at around 150 ppi instead. So you can see a little bit more pixelation when checking out color images. Kind of reminds me more of a newspaper, for example, that might be slightly faded. Obviously, the contrast and colors aren't going to be as vibrant, eye-popping as OLED screens, for example, but I think it's still nice to have if you are looking at comics, graphic novels. It makes it just a little bit more engaging. The software experience is otherwise pretty similar to those other e-notes that we looked at from Bigme. However, it looks like they have recently done some upgrading in terms of giving you almost 2 versions of the launcher. For instance, something called Bigme OS 4.0 versus Bigme OS 5.0. So taking a look here, this is the previous 4.0 UI, granting access to also a quick widget page on the side for universal search, looking up different documents, some of your recently opened applications related to notes as well as reading, and it placed shortcuts on the very bottom here to bring you into the, again, phone dialer pad if you really wanted to make calls with a SIM card popped in addition to text messaging as well as contacts. So communication features are a little bit more heavily emphasized on the bottom compared to the Bigme OS 5, which is their newest version of the launcher, instead replaces those communication widgets with access to take notes, in addition to access your library for reading, as well as voice-to-text transcription capabilities on the bottom here instead. And I think that makes a little bit more sense because, again, it's nice to have cellular, but I think primarily it is going to be used here for staying connected, for accessing the internet and some of these other web-connected apps, instead of necessarily being used for making calls on a form factor like this. And so now the phone, as well as text messaging apps, are placed on some of these separate screens instead of being on the very bottom. Also, the icon packs seem to be a little bit more rounded, slightly larger on this version 5 of the launcher, but overall not a massive difference, I would say. Now, under more advanced system settings, you can see that Bigme has done a little bit of customization, granting you access to universal search on the very top. Pretty simple icons here, and when you are looking at scrolling elements, you can see that it's going to respond just a little bit more quickly compared to past e-ink-based devices like a Kindle, which probably would flicker every time the pixels are being rearranged. It's still not going to be as smooth as on a LCD or OLED screen, but Bigme touts a faster refresh rate mode on their e-ink devices. So you can also go over here to find a home screen style section, and more specifically, there's also a office style mode that you can trigger in their UI. And this will instead defer to a layout quite similar to what we saw on the B751C. So there's going to be a bar on the side that will sort through the applications by tabs, including notes, library for some of your books, versus all the other Android applications, voice translation, so on and so forth, instead of the more conventional Android layout that we saw in the other tablet mode. Functionality-wise, though, it's pretty similar to most Android phones and tablets we've seen, giving you access to the essentials. And by the way, interestingly enough, the advanced system settings drawer also changes to something that looks like this if you choose the office style instead. So it's pretty consistent in having this bar that you can swipe up and down, similar to on the home screen, font size for the system, making it a little bit larger versus smaller, in addition to a power saving mode that will slightly decrease the speed of the 2.3 GHz octa-core processor for slightly more enhanced endurance, auto turn on and off for the screen with the magnetic case, which again will go to sleep whenever you close it up, and when you open it again, there is a sensor there that will turn it on automatically, as well as remapping the up and down keys on the front. For example, listening to an audiobook or watching a YouTube video, you can instead assign this to be a volume rocker. And also under Stylus, interestingly enough, there's also a calibration mode that you can use to test out the sensitivity and accuracy of the stylus pen. You can then tap here to see if it's properly calibrated before hitting on save. Now going back into the home screen here, some other pre-installed applications that you'll find, including some utility functions like a basic voice recorder. Here's a quick test. Functions like a basic voice recorder. Here's a quick test. Overall, the microphone here sounding decent enough for just some quick notes, and also you can use this microphone for the translator as well. If you are a student or a business professional, you can find a pretty exhaustive list of languages. One language on one side, one on the other if you're setting it down on a table between two people. Furthermore, you can find a Bigme GPT application. It's not our first time seeing this. Again, since the B7 has access to the full Google Play Store, there's nothing stopping you from just downloading another AI tool if you really wanted to. For example, Google's Gemini or just regular ChatGPT app. But this first-party version is pretty well integrated across the entire UI, including in the reading mode as well. You can long hold to search up a dictionary definition, as well as the translation to a second language. In addition to on the very bottom here, that same AI functionality can be pulled up as kind of a widget on top of the screen, allowing us to more quickly pull in sentences and paragraphs from any documents, PDFs that you're looking at, allowing you to either rewrite it, kind of formalize it, expand it, or explain it if you have any questions. So this might be helpful if you are a student or business professional, and it will just pull up there as a kind of mini floating window on top of any document that you're looking at. Again, like previously, Bigme provides us with their version of a basic app store as well, although it's not as comprehensive as the full Google Play Store. Instead, it's giving you some recommended applications which might be better performing on an e-ink device like this, some official tools here from Google like Gmail, Google Calendar, for instance, additional reading apps like Kobo Books, as well as the Amazon Kindle app, all work without really any problems. And yes, the hardware on here is sufficient for running some social media communication tools as well, whether that's WhatsApp, Reddit, or if you're listening to audio, yes, you can listen to Spotify on here as well, since it does have the guts of essentially just a Android phone or tablet. No, it doesn't have super flagship level hardware. when it comes to the processor being bleeding edge, for example. But usually on e-ink devices like this, I would argue that the biggest bottleneck is still going to be the refresh rate of the screen. Even on this much improved device, it's still not going to be, again, as buttery smooth as a normal phone, so you're not going to really be using this for AAA style gaming or anything crazy like that anyways. It's primarily designed just for reading, looking at simple articles, things like that, which a slightly less performant processor is still going to be able to just handle mostly fine without too many problems. So as you can see here, we can also run something like Google Maps without too many issues for the most part. It does have built-in GPS as well for navigation purposes. Overall signal strength as well in my testing has also been pretty strong, since the chassis on the side here are still crafted out of metal, so no issues in terms of staying connected with both dual band Wi-Fi, as well as when I tried it with T-Mobile previously. In addition to similar remarks when it comes to listening to audio with Bluetooth, I felt like connectivity was generally fine within a range of around 10 meters or 33 feet. Couple of final utility tools here, like a basic calendar, also allows you to actually draw and annotate on the sticky notes section, as you can see here. Also giving you a quick breakdown of how much you've actually read on that particular date as well. A very basic task list or to-do list, that'd be 1, 2, 3. Using it for some additional organization purposes. And as for their official first-party reading app, it supports pretty much all the file formats that you want to throw at it. Not too surprising, since Android is rather flexible. That includes EPUBs, MOBI, PDF, Word documents, and of course, if you find anything that isn't available by default, you could always just download another third-party reading app of your choice if you prefer. But honestly, I found that the official first-party app to already be pretty well performing for the most part. You can also see a simplified UI here with additional battery status, and if I tap on a particular section of the page here, I can also have the pages automatically flip after X seconds, further change settings here including the contrast, font size as well, granting you some more accessibility functionality. In fact, we can also open up a document and notepad view, which will split it into two different windows. This can actually be pretty handy if you want to write something down very quickly on a separate document while you're reading. And so the additional RAM on here will help you with multitasking, just feeling a little bit more smooth, even if you are running a few more applications here in the background simultaneously. As you can see here, I now have around 9 applications running and still using under 4 gigabytes of RAM. So compared to the previous model, if you want to jump back and forth between more open programs, also if you're doing some web browsing, it's just going to feel a little bit more speedy without the background applications closing up quite as often. Also, a couple more gestures that the UI supports include a full page refresh if you swipe up from the bottom right hand corner like this. It will kind of blink once to get rid of any residue or ghosting on the e-ink panel, versus swiping up on the left side here will pull up the multitasking view compared to going home if you swipe there on the middle. You can also pull up additional commands for customizing, such as swiping up and down on the sides of the screen over here to adjust things like volume, or activate the 36 level front light to be warmer or colder. Now finally, if we go back home here, I can also swipe down on the top right hand corner to access the control panel for the accelerometer, wireless connectivity, as well as the front light controls. And it's a pretty even and consistent lighting, which allows you to still use it if you're reading in darker environments, for example in bed. A couple of presets are also found that slightly changes the color temperature as well accordingly. Plus you can further crank up the brightness as well as the color temperature based on your liking, making it warmer versus colder. As mentioned previously, you can also choose to turn it completely off to consume even less power. Similar to on a phone or tablet, you can also find quick shortcuts for using the LED light on the camera as a flashlight or torch. Plus you can also turn on and off location services with the GPS, share the screen onto an external wireless TV or monitor using Miracast, jump again quickly into the translator or AI applications from anywhere in the UI just by pulling this down, as well as a e-ink center, which is pretty comprehensive. So for example, it's going to automatically detect the content that you're looking at and switch in terms of the refresh rate modes, but you can also manually override it into some specific profiles. For example, one here for looking at magazines, one here for comics that will pull up the contrast for colors a little bit more, one for video, which will increase the screen's refresh rate, but there might be a little bit more ghosting and artifacting, and also other custom properties that you can change for the contrast, brightness, refresh frequency, as well as the sharpness of the screen. Now jumping into the note-taking app, this aspect honestly feels quite familiar and similar to the B751C, and again, because it is a color display, you're able to show a little bit more information through highlighting compared to everything being black and white on a more conventional e-ink panel. So you can access some basic tools here, including the width of the stroke, as well as the color of the pen or highlighter that you're using, as well as choose between a couple other writing instruments like a normal pen versus calligraphy versus a pencil. You can see some slight differences in the texture as well. I would say the pencil is trying to imitate the graphite a little bit more in terms of the texture, as you can see there, versus the calligraphy pen, as well as a brush. And the ballpoint pen actually won't have any variance in terms of light or dark. It doesn't really matter how hard you're pressing. It's all going to look very similar compared to if you're using the calligraphy pen having a little bit more variance, and especially the pencil mode here having the most. So if you're trying to do a little bit more shading, you can actually see that a bit better using the pencil. Overall, not bad, although technically the stylus here is not exactly using the Wacom EMR standard, which continues to reign supreme when it comes to accuracy as kind of the golden standard. So for example, on some of Bigme's more expensive, larger eNotes, which are 10 inches or 12 inches, in addition to the Kindle Scribes, Remarkables of the world will instead opt for the Wacom EMR stylus standard, which tends to have even lower latency and higher sensitivity. But on here, it's certainly not bad. At least we already get some pressure sensitivity built in. And overall, I would say that in terms of palm rejection, it does an okay job. You can set your hand down on here and still write at the same time. Doesn't seem to get too confused. So there is that capacitive multi-touch touchscreen plus the active stylus input. And otherwise for erase, you do have to tap on the separate key, and then you can circle over a section that you want to erase, as you can see there, before it will delete it. Or of course, you can also tap over here to choose another option, which would be stroke based. Tap over specific sections that you want to erase. So eraser wise, it's not quite as precise perhaps as some of the Wacom EMR devices, but functionality wise you still get those controls that you're looking for. And here's also an example of how it looks like if you are writing. For the most part, definitely still it feels legible enough, even if you are tapping and drawing, creating some small details as you can see there. Certainly not bad in terms of following the stylus tip as you are moving across the screen for the most part. Again, thanks to the slightly upgraded hardware internals on here as well. And as we can see here, all the pages inside of a journal can also be customized in terms of the template independently from page to page. So we can tap over here to pull this up, and you find a pretty decent selection of built-in templates, including ones here for scheduling purposes, some even consulting, as well as financial report document types, examples for music production, other kind of note types, graph template, for example, mathematics, and also to-do list templates, so on and so forth. In addition to uploading your own templates as well as a PDF can also be used, with some additional features here also including shapes that you can add onto different drawings of your notes, in addition to an OCR functionality as well for optical character recognition. So if you are handwriting a page of notes, it will try to convert that into typed text format, which might look a little bit more neat that you can then copy and paste, for example, into another document, or again, share it onto your Google Drive, your Outlook, or even email. The tabs on the side here can also be hidden from view or collapse if you want to take up a little bit less of the space. On the very top here, you can also find a ability to add multiple layers onto your drawing. So for example, if you don't want to mess up an existing layer of a template, you can then write on top on a second layer and only change that particular layer or delete it, keeping everything underneath it, adding up to 5 layers per page. In addition to a lasso functionality, so I can circle over specific words, for example, and resize it, again, converting it into text using OCR or pop it into a different region of the page, so on and so forth. So overall, not bad in terms of the quick note-taking experience. It'll definitely get the job done. Now you can also find an accessibility kind of floating ball on the side that you can tap on to also go back home, pull up multitasking, capture a screenshot, providing you with some of these extra shortcuts if you want to use it or collapse it from view. You can also disable this under more advanced system settings. Now finally, let's take a look at the camera layout here, which is also relatively basic. Again, activating a higher refresh rate mode so you can see it's not going to blink quite as much, and you're still able to get a decent enough preview of what the camera here is seeing. On the very top, you can also turn on HDR as well as the flash settings. Actually doing a decent enough job. We can also pinch in and out using multi-touch. Again, perhaps a better use case here though would be scanning in documents, activated using the separate little application here. So here I'm going to take a quick image of a book just to serve as demonstration. We have an OCR section activated. It's going to take a couple seconds there to recognize and parse it into a typed text format, which perhaps might be more useful if you're looking at a handwritten note that you can also convert into a text format instead, and then export it either as a PDF or a text copy that you can then share. Not a bad idea, although in terms of accuracy, I will say you have to make sure that you crop the specific section of the document that you're trying to transcribe, and also if you're looking at a handwritten note, you do need to have at least decent handwriting. If your writing is a little bit too sloppy or has too much cursive going on, then sometimes the recognition can be a little more hit or miss, almost feeling like a modern organizer or PDA, but again, combining many of those functions into a more modern form. Now let's also jump into the default web browser here from Bigme. Again, you can also download the regular Google Chrome, Opera, Firefox browsers based on your preference, but this is what it looks like by default. And something I'm noticing here is it looks like they've customized the Google keyboard layout to be split, which actually feels decent as you're typing, a little more ergonomic. Also, this one does have haptic vibration motor inside as well. It will slightly buzz whenever you're tapping on the keyboard, kind of like a phone, for instance. And jumping into a quick site here as demonstration from The Verge, you can see it's not going to be instantaneous, but still is a serviceable experience as long as you have just a moment or two's patience for the page here to completely load, overall providing an enjoyable enough experience. Also, despite the fact that it is a pretty slim and lightweight e-reader, it seems like the device still remains pretty cool during operation. I feel like I've been pressing it pretty hard over the past hour or so, just running through tons of applications, jumping back and forth, multitasking in the background, but there's still very minimal heat that I can notice while touching the rear panel of the device. So pretty decent in terms of thermal efficiency. As far as the audio transcription capabilities are concerned, so here is a quick test of the voice-to-text transcription capabilities, and we can see that as I'm speaking in real time, the actual words will appear in front of me with punctuation being corrected as well. Actually, really not bad. So it's another handy feature that you can activate as a utility tool for students and business professionals. You can see that text version appear on the very top. I can tap there to stop and also play back the original audio recording, as well as see the typed out word format down below here. I can also use the AI here to summarize it into bullet points, polish it, extract the core information, again, using the large language model. So it's nice to have some of these features tucked away at a click. Working pretty decently. In fact, kind of reminds me of something like the Plod Note AI voice recorder, except you have those features built into the hardware of this Android tablet. Just by using the microphones, doing a decent job of picking up the voice. Under screensaver, you can also use the e-ink screen as kind of a desk clock mode. So for example, you can have it refresh after X minutes, again, consuming minimal power only when the digits are being switched. Also, light versus dark doesn't really impact the battery life on an e-ink screen. So for example, on the calendar mode, it will now look something like this, showing some basic notifications, the current time, which you can just set on your desk using the folio kickstand, for example, acting as an e-ink clock and calendar that looks relatively elegant. Really not bad, and viewing angles of course are not going to be a problem on this e-ink panel, which is also a matte finish, so it doesn't reflect as much light compared to a glossy panel. Also, yes, very simple puzzle or tap and go style casual games can still run on here. The processor still seems to be handling it decently, but again, the screen's refresh rate might be a slightly larger limitation there. Again, it is very much geared towards reading with this Kaleido 3 color e-ink display. Here's also a quick example of looking at a webtoon, kind of comic, graphic novel, and again, I think it still is looking quite nice, providing you with just a nice splash of color, as you can see here, compared to everything being in black and white. And the form factor here, I would say, definitely is a larger canvas to work with compared to their Bigme Highbreak, even though the diagonal is not going to seem that far off, 6 inches compared to 7 inches, but because of the more squarish aspect ratio, it can fill a little bit more into the surface if you are doing things like looking at comics or PDFs. That being said, if you are looking at textbooks, I would still probably recommend for you to consider one of their larger eNote devices that has around maybe a 10-inch screen. Otherwise, you may have to zoom in a little bit more. I mean, it's perfectly fine for comics, usually a little easier to rescale also through pinch and zoom or changing the font size. But if there's a ton of tables and tiny text details, then that's where maybe a larger eNote might be more beneficial. Also, if you want a larger canvas to write things down compared to a more compact unit like this. Instead, shines a little bit more if you're using it when on the go for traveling. I think the portability here is still quite nice. And as far as packaging contents are concerned, we have access to the aforementioned folio case provided, in addition to a pretty standard USB Type-C charging data sync cable, as well as a quick start guide, and underneath here you'll find the SIM ejector pin, in addition to one more spare nib for the stylus. If the plastic there kind of wears down after more repeated usage, you can then pull it out and swap it with that replacement. So that is more or less it as far as our closer look at the Bigme B7. Overall, I would say it's a nice upgrade, pretty much in all of the core specs compared to the B751C. It just feels a bit more refined. The buttons are a little bit more tactile, crafted out of metal versus plastic. The stylus is now magnetic and also wireless charging instead of using physical batteries that you have to swap out every few months, and also having more RAM, more storage, more versatile data connectivity, all thrown into the mix. So it actually is one of the more versatile, I would dare say powerful, 7-inch compact e-readers or e-notes that you can find on the market, and the freedom to run more applications as well as productivity related tools on this pretty nice looking e-ink panel. So in this particular instance, not a bad upgrade all things considered. That said, if you're sure that you don't need the cellular capabilities, the B751C still remains a decent choice for saving a few extra bucks, or the even more compact B6 that we saw from before, I think still remains as one of the best value budget e-readers that we've seen from this brand, versus this one being more of a mid-ranger that has just a few more features tucked in. So you can check out more details if you're interested in something like this in the links down below, but for now that's been our video. Thanks for watching here at OS Reviews. That has been the Bigme B7.